So a lot's happened in the last 9 years since we spoke, because you were about to go on a camper van holiday in New Zealand.
Yeah, and now I live there.
Yeah, no,
I mean, a lot has happened since the camper van holiday,
yeah.
and
Was it a good holiday?
it was a really good holiday. Yeah, it was.
Had you met your current missus at the time?
No, I hadn't.
Ah, I
No, I
see.
hadn't. I met her in 2006
Right.
when I was producing an album in New Zealand. We happened to be in the same restaurant one lunchtime, and now we're married. So,
Yeah.
and I married very well. She'd built a house in New Zealand, and so she built it and I moved in,
Yeah.
and then we decided to come back to the UK for 5 years, and she wrote a book, and
Because you were working a lot on Modern World, weren't you? Down
yeah, I've just been there today actually doing
Right.
some mixing. We tend to do all our mixing there, just because it's a room that myself and Clinton Murphy have used for a long time, and we always end up wherever we track, we tend to go back to Modern World because
Right.
we know the sound of the place, we know what we're going to get from there. But I've kind of made a conscious effort to try a lot of different studios out over the last few years, mainly because I'd always been somebody who sort of found a studio I liked and stayed there to kind of force a habit. It's like if I find a restaurant I like, I go and
Yeah.
go back there.
Yeah.
But so I made a conscious effort to try some different studios out. Like we were at Rockfield last week. We spent a lot of time at ICP in Brussels, which I really love. I've been up to Blackrock in Santorini quite a bit, and Sono in Prague. So we've really moved around quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it's not always nice to come back to the same studio to mix.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting hearing the difference of the sonics when you bring it back, and
sure
especially
it must be,
if you're not taking your own monitoring with you.
Yeah.
Like you go to ICP, you come back and there's this overwhelming bass,
Really?
from everything. And Rockfield was pretty flat, so that was really good.
What are the main monitors at Rockfield now? Then? What
They've still got those massive JBLs
Have they really?
that no one ever
Jolly
uses,
big loudspeakers.
and some NS10s. Actually, we took some General X down,
Yeah.
which kind of really helped.
But
But
did
it
you
was
use the echo chambers?
yes, that big white room. It was incredible.
Yeah.
It was just really sounded amazing, because there's a lot of folklore that goes with those rooms. The echo rooms, and you get a bit skeptical about it. Also, the whole thing about the vibe at Rockfield.
Yeah.
I was always really skeptical of the whole vibe thing.
So you've never been there before?
Well, I've been in the coach house, and
Right.
I sensed a bit of it,
Yeah.
but I really felt it this time. You kind of like, and the musicians feel it. I think that's what it is. They feel, oh man, Freddie Mercury probably sat at this piano and did this, and and the Stone Roses did that, and they burnt a car in the courtyard, and you kind of feel the history there, and Kingsley's there, and and it's just steeped in that kind of rock history. I was reading the Q magazine rock stories in this month,
Right.
and I think about 10 of the stories are based at Rockfield. It just seems to attract that whole
There's a big chapter on it in Julian Cope's autobiography.
Right. It's such such a history.
Yeah.
And for me, being an old prog rocker, like the Rush, Farewell to Kings was done there.
Farewell to Kingsley.
And Farewell to Kingsley, and Hemispheres was done there. And for me, I get more excited about that than sort of the Queen albums. Alex Lifeson played guitar in here, and Neil Peart was here. And
Brilliant.
So I think the whole vibe thing really is just, it's the records that that were done there, and you can kind of like records that you grew up with as a kid.
Yeah.
I still, luckily over the years you get to know other producers and producers who I was a massive fan of when I was younger, like Tony Visconti and Rupert Hine, people and I still, I had a chance to meet both of them. And I still feel like a fan, and all I want to know is know about the records that they worked on, and records that I was brought up with. And when Rupert Hine came to Modern World one evening, Nick Cowan, the owner, phoned up and said, "We've got a producer coming around. It's a guy called Rupert Hine." And I said, "Oh, can I come up?" And so I cornered him in the room, and probably talked for about an hour and a half. I think I talked at him for an hour and a half. But he was really, really wonderful. He sort of told me a lot of the stories about the records, and it was such a joy to hear the inside stories behind these things. So I think that desire to be a fan is something that I've tried to get back.
Yeah.
Because you know what it's like. You spend so much time behind a desk and so much time in the studio, and the last thing you want to do when you finish recording is let's put an album on.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for moving to New Zealand was I felt I was it is a young person's game to some degree. I think like 14, 15 hours a day week in, week out, month in, month out, can really affect how you view music. And I wanted to gain some of that innocence back again. So, and just do some play with some musicians I wanted to play with, start being in a room with musicians in the studio again. And that was a really big part of, you know, lucky I've had the luxury of being able to take time out and go back, and you know, because I've, you know, worked a lot over the last 20 years, so the way I see it, it's all the weekends that I worked, I'm cashing them in now.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And it's good, because now when I come back to Europe, which is usually about every 3 months, you know, I really enjoy the process of making records again, and I feel excited, and I'm going back in the studio next week. Not, oh no, I'm in the studio again today. You know, it's and you know, if I can keep that, I think it'll give me some longevity. At least give me maybe another 10 years of making records, hopefully, before my hearing goes. You know, all those years as a drummer. You know, I'm sure like those Chinese cymbals in your ear in the 80s. You know, it's going to get you at some point.
And you don't mind travelling around then? You obviously quite like getting about, and I mean, I like my home comforts. That's why I built a studio adjoining my house, because I quite like just going straight to my own bed. But you don't mind sort of.
I do like it.
Hotels and
my
and
parents were very big travellers when I was younger.
Right.
Like my father was like a real pioneer of sort of like working abroad. He would go and work in Africa in the 50s.
Right.
You know, and it'd take him 4 days to get there by flying boat.
Wow. And
you know, and he would, every so often at dinner he'd come out with an amazing story like, oh yeah, I used to hang out with Humphrey Bogart. And we, what? So, oh yeah, when they were filming The African Queen, I was putting all the hydro supplies in by Lake Victoria. We just hang out in the bar together, and he'd sit there with Lauren Bacall and Katharine Hepburn, and it's like, this is great. Why didn't you tell me this story before? You know, it's so I think it was in the family, the whole travelling thing. And as children, we travelled to the Middle East a lot for where Dad was working.
Right.
So I think I've always enjoyed the idea of micro careers, of like there are more territories than the one where you live. So I thought, well, you know, I like travelling. I like going to different places and meeting musicians. And as I'm sure you know, there is still a certain kudos to being a British record producer. You know, we're seen as slightly cooler, kind of like, you know, however we see ourselves. You know, it does seem to have some traction when you work abroad. So I tend to go to a country to do a record, but then while I was there, I'd always try and take a lot of meetings and try and build up contacts in those territories. So over the last 10 years, you know, I've spent a lot of time in Greece recording, Netherlands, Switzerland, where we're going next week to record, Ireland, New Zealand, obviously, and you know, they've become really strong territories. That every year you get like maybe a month or two's worth of work in those territories, and the year's soon full of work.
Absolutely, yeah.
And in between that, you get work in the UK, and so
keep you busy.
Yeah,
So,
I've never minded that idea of being away. I think, you know, I don't have children, so that's, you know, that I think that has enabled me to, you know, that's obviously there are downsides to that, but I think that you know, I'm very free to travel.
I mean, I don't do much travelling now, but I remember, you know, when you go to Japan or somewhere, and it seems a bit kind of less pressured.
Yeah, I think that, yeah.
You sort of feel that, and you kind of do your best work because of that, because you kind of feel relaxed, and you kind of just, and they're sort of impressed that you've even turned up before you even started. So you kind of, you know, you're coming from a much better position, aren't you, really? And you sort of relax, and you just enjoy yourself, and you do what you think's right.
Well, I always loved. You know, I always loved going to New Zealand to work because it was a beautiful place to go. But I felt not pressured. You know, they wanted me to be there. You know, you always want to work with artists who want to work with you. And the sessions that are always most difficult are the ones where the artist has been, you know, forced upon you by the label. Yeah. You know, they're the ones you feel the need to prove yourself. And I think that that it's really nice when you go into a territory and they're glad to see you. You know. And I think you certainly are more relaxed, and some of my favourite records have been done in faraway places, and I've done quite a lot of non-English language albums recently, which is a challenge in its own right. There was a band called Onorama, who were a Greek band who were very, very popular in Greece, and we went over and tracked. We had a crazy couple of weeks of tracking.
Do you take an engineer when you go abroad?
I try to take Clint or one of the engineers that we've trained over there's a lot of young guys that have spent a few years with us,
right?
And they become like mini Clints or mini me's, you know, and they know all the techniques, and but also the advantage is we now have a few people dotted around the world in different time zones. So when we're in Europe working, we use our engineer Nick Portman, who I use in New Zealand a lot, we upload work to him overnight. Right. Drum samples, backing vocal comping, and he does that overnight. So basically, you're running your session for 24-hour days, and it's amazing. It cuts down your studio rates. It means you can do sessions a lot quicker, and also, the things that kill a session. It's like, oh no, I got to put snare samples on, and I got all these backing vocals to comp. Yeah, and all the things that really kill the creativity are basically jobs that someone can do at home on a laptop. So we just open the Gobbler account up, upload everything overnight. You come back in the morning, and all those jobs are done.
Wow.
So
as long as you've got a fast internet.
Which is a problem at Rockfield, and it's a problem in a lot of the places we go. You've got to build that in. I actually do look into internet speeds before we get somewhere, although I didn't last week, and it's like 29 hours to upload a drum track. It's like, And musicians aren't stupid anymore. There were days where you could hide things. Everyone knows what you're doing. So I think these days you've got to be open with musicians and have that discussion as part of the production process before you start. So it's something I bring up in conversation, and something I've really tried to do a lot. I do a lot these days is I have a lot of discussions with the artist before we even go into the studio. So the Skype conversations or FaceTime, you spend a lot of time. Like the session we did last week, I probably had 5 hours of discussions just about music and about how we wanted to approach the songs, and what we were going to do, and here's some examples of what I think we're going to do, and and if you're open with the artist, then I think they do appreciate that, and it stops it being a secretive process of like we're going to slide off and edit all your drum tracks up, and so but I think that confidence comes with making lots of records and just being a bit older, and all the head games become less important. I just if you want to work with me, that's great. If you don't, that's fine too. There's lots of really good producers out there who will do you a great job. So I've luckily got into that position where I can actually do that now, and it's really taken a lot of pressure off. It's like I really don't mind if you don't want to do the session with me. I don't have to do it. It's when you're 25 and it's like I've got to get some money. I've got the rent to pay and all these things. So
I mean, how do you price up your work? Does that? I mean, you've got Stephen Budd still managing you. Does he do everything for you? Or?
No, but I pretty much.
Or you deal direct.
I pretty much deal direct with the artists, mainly because then I know it's done. Because when you've got a roster like Steve's, that's a lot of producers to deal with, and I know some other producers are a little bit more demanding, shall I say? So I like to, if they get the work, then I'll run with the board. I'll book all my flights. I'll book the hotels. I'll do all the organising, and I like that side of it, and it's something that I've like the idea of being an executive producer actually quite appeals to me. A lot of people hate that side of it, but I love being organised. I like that side of it. So it's part of what I'm trying. I wanted to do with this recordproducer.com website that I've been setting up. It's help people organise their sessions, because musicians are like, they're pretty disorganised bunch. I was a musician myself, and I know how disorganised I used to be. And there's a lot of really good young producers who just sometimes need some help, just organise their sessions, or artists who are self-producing. So what I wanted to do was have this idea of all the services you offer as a producer, whether it's session planning or song arrangement or arranging mixing, arranging musicians, sorting out string arrangements. You could break all those into individual elements and then and have a price point for each of those things. So an artist who was self-producing could say, well, actually, I just need a string arranger, or I need some help with song arrangements, and or I need to find a good mix engineer. Or
why are they going to come to your website rather than just going to the Google string arrangers?
Well, I mean, I think just having a one-on-one, somebody who's got a track record,
a one-stop shop.
A one-stop shop for everything, it was. I think as you get older, as I've got older, that desire to kind of like assist people is, and especially young musicians and young engineers and producers. I think it's an important side of it. So I do quite a lot of university lecturing for like master classes and one-on-ones and things, because it's a really hard industry to get into, and I wouldn't want to be starting now. So if I can help somebody out, and obviously there's a need to earn a living. So I think there's a balance to be had where you can sort of not, some people haven't got the expense of bringing in a producer in for a whole project, but they can tap into some of the connections you've got. As I'm sure you have, you have deals with like mastering houses and mix engineers and musicians, and because you have a certain amount of work that you can divide out, so you get better deals with everybody, so you can sort of pass on some of those deals. So it's an enabling thing really, and I think it's I mean, it might work, it might not work, but I think it's something that I've not seen much of. So I thought I'd give it a go and see if maybe something I can do when I'm 65. I can sit in my living room and organise some sessions and do some executive producing work.
So guest lecturing at universities. What would you go and speak on? What's your latest couple of lectures you do?
Well, I find a lot of it's about, because everyone's very interested in the technical side of it, which mics to use, what compressors to use, do you use Logic, do you use Pro Tools, whereas I think the motivational aspect of how to motivate musicians, how to be well organised on a session, a lot of things that don't seem to get taught in a lot of the courses, I think they're really important. So I try to emphasise that side of it, especially the motivational side for musicians, because an unmotivated musician will not give you the performances you're looking for, however amazing the mic sounds, however great the compressor is, and so but a lot of it's Q&A stuff. I do a large proportion of what I do is Q&A, and then I'll bring in some stems and multi-tracks, and we'll break them down. I tend to use those for the sort of smaller, the high-end students. I did the Gus Dudgeon summer school last year in Cardiff on Gus's old desk, and it was really good. It was all the best students from all the courses around the country, and they were really good. They were really talented, and they all great at Pro Tools, and so it was really just let's record a song. Let's bring some musicians in. We'll record it. What mics would you use? And try and get them to sort of make some choices. And I actually learnt some things myself. It's like, there were some terrible choices, but there was also lots of great choices, and it was just the depth of knowledge for young engineers. Can you give us
for instance, what did you learn from them?
Oh, a couple of there was some weird under micing cymbal technique, which actually sounded pretty good. It was quite a really dark kind of sound. And I think there's something really good about being surrounded by young musicians and artists. It's easy to get jaded, isn't it? And they come in with all this enthusiasm and excitement. By the end of the week, isn't music great? It's fantastic. It's so wonderful to be involved in this thing, I really came away with it with sort of feeling energized, and so it benefits me as much as it hopefully benefits the people you're talking to, and it's interesting going to different countries. All the courses pretty much teach the same thing. I suppose there's a reason for that, but none of them really emphasize this kind of like how important it is to engage with the musicians and interact with them and be able to take them aside and discuss if there's a problem, or tell them some home truths. It's like those are things that I think they have to be done, and a lot of the musicians that I really had the biggest stand-up rows with in the studio have become some of my closest friends, because there's that moment where you see it in their eyes, they realise that you really care about the record, where you're not just some guy coming in to take their money. You're someone who cares about their art and about their music, and once you get that, then there's that then you get that connection, and then the record tends to go a lot more smoothly. But they often has come out of the biggest stand-up kind of Barneys in the studio.
And how do you cope with if you've Clinton, you've put together the most fantastic mix, and you email them the MP3, and they come back and go, well, it sounds like the vocals are too loud, or the bass drum needs a bit of 3K, or do you work through those ideas and send them?
I try to do to get a really strong consensus. If it's a band, like the album we've just done at ICP, there's a lot of people involved. There's 6 band members. There's two label A&R, there's the CEO and the A&R. There's 2 managers. So you're copying 10 people in on your mixes. So the last thing I want is 10 emails. So I asked the band to get a consensus about what they want to change, and I'm always aware of what the label want, because I try to spend a bit of time with the label before I start any records. At least have a lot of discussion with them as well, because to find out if there's a common ground. Because often you get that terrible thing where the label want one thing and the band wants something else, and it's almost like there is no way through that. It's always going to be some hideous compromise. So you try and find the common ground of what everybody wants, and the sort of records they want to make, and go and sit and.
It's very hard to talk in abstract terms, though, isn't it?
It is. I mean, when I went to Prague on the start of this trip, I spent a whole afternoon with the CEO of the label, just listening to music. It's like, there were some issues with the previous tracks we did. We were pretty close, but he couldn't quite put it into words what he wanted. So it's like, well, let's go and listen to a lot of music. We spent 6 hours one Sunday afternoon just playing tracks and discussing it and playing the songs that we'd worked on. And by the end of it, it was a really, really clear. He had a really clear idea that wasn't actually that far from what the band wanted to do. So
interesting.
That discussion side is it's so easy just to turn up on a session and go into it. Whereas if you go in with a really clear head, it just goes so much more smoothly, and then it becomes fun again. It's not about, you don't have to have stand-up rows in the studio. It can be, you can use that time and be creative.
It's harder to have rows when they're on the other end of an email as well, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And when you're stuck away in New Zealand, it's like, I mean, the one of the
email says the vocals go. You go, what? Vocals go.
Isn't it funny how sort of, even though they're the artists and you want to make a record for them, your hackles still get up when you start getting this. And do you have the sort of, you send the mixed nerves?
Yeah.
Where you sort of like, no, so many producers have told me about this, So as you hit the send, your heart kind of sinks. It's like, oh no, they're going to get the mixes now, and it's like, then I'm going to get all these emails back, and so I've signed this 2-day cooling off period, whereas I will not reply to any emails that arrive before 48 hours. So you've got to at least give the mixes a chance. I actually didn't tell someone the other week about the cooling off period. I forgot to tell them. I sent the mixes over at 10:30, and at 11:15 I had this massive long email of changes, and I said, I will not speak to you until, I'm sorry I forgot to tell you about the cooling off period. Live with the mixes a couple of days.
It's a great idea.
And an email came through 4 days later with, like, instead of like 50 changes, there were 3 changes.
Yeah.
So, we were totally wrong. We really love them now. And
that's such a great idea. The
always
cooling off period. I'm going to remember that one. That's brilliant.
Well, it's so easy to sort of listen to something and panic and and it's
it's
not exactly what I thought, and then you take some time with it. We've all done that thing where you, in the old days, where you do 10 mixes with like hi-hat up 1 dB, guitar down 2 dB, and then you put them on 3 days later. It's like they all sound exactly the same. Yeah. So and our ears are fairly well tuned to things, and so.
It's always the classic one was when you're in the studio having that mixed discussion and you're coming from 2 opposing views and you go, all right, I'll try it, and then you try it, and then eventually you sort of listen to it, and you eventually go, actually I think you were right, and then they go, no, I think you were right.
Yeah.
You kind of swaps,
I mean, it's a delicate balance of egos in the studio, and record producers, we have as bigger egos as anybody, and well, I speak for myself.
Totally, yeah.
But so you want to feel that you're right, and it's almost like when someone comes up with a really good idea and that against what you advised, actually that's really good. It's like, and I think now it's like, it's really good. It's a really good idea, and it's so easy to say no, but it's because that saying yes will take some time, and you've always up against that sort of especially
you got a flight booked.
Yeah, or I mean, I don't have the luxury of having a lovely studio like yours, and so I'm always
Well, I've always got the next session booked.
Yeah, the next session booked, and you've always got the half an eye on the clock. But the questions I never answer to musicians are we on schedule? Are we behind schedule? And my stock answer is you don't need to know. Because if I tell you we're ahead of schedule, you'll relax, and then we'll be behind schedule. If we're behind schedule, you don't need to know, because what am I going to say? Hurry up! This vocal's taking forever. How to kill a vocal? So I just internalize it all, and I get the stomach ulcers.
That's another very good top tip.
It's like the stomach ulcers are mine. I've earned them. You don't need to know. You just enjoy the process of making the record, and I will deal with everything else. And it seems to work, if you just book every studio on a lockout rate, and if you go 2 hours over, that's fine. If you finish early, which bizarrely seems to have happened quite a lot recently, is that everything's become such a finely tuned operation that we finish a lot of sections quite early.
Right.
And it's like, I could have if I'd have added all those couple of hours up, I could have saved a whole day studio time. But it's I've got I think I've got a really strong team of people, and they've got really good assistants. Clint's, myself and Clint have been working together for 11 years, and all the assistants we use are people that we've trained up. And I've got a great team of musicians. I've got a great string arranger. So we've got a really good relationship with Ryan Smith at Sterling Sound, who does masters 99.9% of the stuff that I do. So, and he's really handy to have if we have a problem with a room. It's like, can you have a quick listen to this? Let us know what you think the problem is, and you'll send us back an email with some notes. And those are relationships that are really important to being able to make records on the budgets that are now available.
And are you the person who sits down and works out the budget and how much the studio is going to cost and negotiates?
Yeah, I love a good haggle.
Yeah,
I love a good haggle with the studio manager. I really enjoy that. And studios want producers to be there. They know that. I pretty much brought 5 or 6 years worth of work to Modern World while I was in the UK. I still bring work there, even though I live in New Zealand. So the studios are always willing to do deals, and they always want to have new producers in. So there's always good initial deals. It's trying to keep those deals going, and I really love budgeting. It sounds so nerdy, but I get a real great satisfaction about just because I don't want to shortchange musicians. If I'm bringing musicians in, I want them to get paid properly, because it's hard enough knowing what it's like being a musician. It's hard enough. The last thing I want to shortchange is a musician, and you want the studio to get paid a fair amount of money. Yeah. And a lot of the times I will be, actually I've got 2 sessions here to do. This one's got a fairly healthy budget. This one's got a really small budget. So why don't we do some deal where I can maybe charge a bit more for this one, and then you can give me a deal on this one, rather than always go in for the deal. Because it's unfair on studios that they're constantly undercut, because they've got overheads to pay, and they are businesses, and the last thing you want to do is have a relationship with the studio and it to go under because they're not getting paid enough for their day rate. So I think if you can have that discussion with the studio managers, and then it's in everybody's interest. And if your musicians are getting paid well, musicians don't need motivating, because I've always had the philosophy of, I bring in people that I want to be in a room with, that I like their energy they bring in the session. They may not be the greatest player, but they have something that when you listen to the track you think, I love what they did. Yeah. And those are the sort of people I like, and I like being surrounded by people with good energies, because although it sounds a bit hippie, it's really important. You don't want negative energy on a session. So and I've been really lucky that all these fantastic people that I get to work with regularly, they bring a lot, and the artists love it. It's a real joy when that happens. Yeah. Most producers these days expect to have their own studios.
Yeah. And you seem to manage to get away with not having one.
Yeah, well, I did have one. I owned a studio called Big Noise, which was...
Was this with Ramesh? Or
no, this was before... I basically... Before Longwave, and I got involved with Ramesh, I had a studio called Big Noise, and it was... Basically, we took over an old studio in a back street in Cardiff in 95, 96. And Tascam MSR16, Alan Heath desk. But we had 2 million record sales, over 2 million records from that studio. Catatonia, Max Street Preacher, 6 Foot Dolls, Super Free Animals, Gorky Syncoptic Monkey. There was so many records that came out of that. We just were in the right place at the right time, and that's what launched my production career, really, was being in this little tiny studio recording Catatonia albums on an MSR16. Yeah.
I mixed the 60 Foot Dolls single. I'd forgotten about that. It's not even on my CV. So long ago.
Did you actually spend time with the band?
No.
Oh man, They were the most rock and roll band I've ever met. I still work with Richard Parfitt, the singer and guitarist, occasionally on projects. He's a very, very talented guy and a really great musician. But so I did own a studio, and it was really good for a while. But it got knocked down and repossessed by the Cardiff Bay Redevelopment Corporation. So I spent 2 years in legal battles, proving that the music industry was actually a proper profession, and having young sort of surveyors sitting across tables from me in sort of solicitors' offices saying, why didn't you get a proper job? You're 40 years old. At which point I did want to jump across the table and punch them in the face, but we were proved right in the end, and we got good compensation for it, which we used to set up a record label. But I started speaking to Ramesh. He would MSN message me. This is how long ago it was.
Yeah.
With questions. You know, it's like who's this young kid getting in touch with me? And we developed quite a strong friendship over the years of kind of he'd and I remember he played me some tracks he'd recorded in his parents' house, and they were amazing. They just sounded incredible. It's like, how did you get the drum sound? I put I put the snare drum out in the sort of in the porchway. It's like, wow, this guy's really good. And obviously he's gone on to be like a really successful record producer. And it's really encouraging when you see young producers come through, because it's a hard thing to break into. There's a friend of mine, Joel Little, who I recorded when he was the lead singer of a band called Goodnight Nurse. He was this tall, lanky guy, comes in playing the sort of like sort of punk pop songs, and he just wrote 50% of the Lord record, and he just won a Grammy for Song of the Year.
Wow.
And he's just he's become this fantastic record producer, and it's really great when you see these amazingly talented young people get into a profession that's quite a difficult thing to break into. So it's but I liked having a studio with Ramesh, but he was so busy, you just couldn't get in it.
No.
In the end, I just gave up. I just hire other studios. So you're in there for the next 6 months. I'll just go somewhere else. So so when he moved premises, and he sort of bought me out. And but yeah, I'm really proud of Rom. He's a really fantastic producer, and he should eat some better food, because he's going to get like I did, and he's going to have a heart attack. So I think that's something I should talk about more in lectures. Health of a record producer.
Yeah.
40
you
cigarettes.
lost a lot of weight since we've interviewed you before.
Yeah, my wife helps me with that, but 40 cigarettes a day and like the pies from the garage on the way into Rockfield are not a good way to eat. And it was I collapsed in a taxi on the way back from a Skindred session at Loco, and I remember asking the cab driver to drop me off at the Heath Hospital in Cardiff.
Oh dear.
And they put me on an ECG machine. They were like, get some sleep, stop smoking, eat healthily.
Wow. And
it's like, so that was the start of this quest to try and
So when was that?
That was, this is not that long before we did our last interview. So I was at the start of a very, very long journey. Yeah. But but I think it's really important, because nothing will kill your health more than being in a recording studio.
Absolutely,
I used to sit behind the desk at Mono Valley just chain smoking all day, back in the days when you could smoke in a recording studio.
Yeah.
So it was it's not good for you. So Ramesh should probably stop smoking so much. He'll learn eventually, hopefully not in the back of a taxi on the way back from the studio, but it's a really important part of the job, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask you more technically sort of stuff, because I mean, last time we had a proper chat, I think was when we were at Modern World. We had a sort of drum workshopy day, of which there was a video, and we were all sitting around the table. I think it was Simon there, wasn't he? Simon Turner, and we were chatting about mixing drums, and you were adamant that if you put a reverb on something, maybe it wasn't even drums we were talking about, but if you put a reverb on something that was panned, you had to pan the reverb the same way.
I don't think that was me, but
somebody was saying that anyway.
But yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
I always used to like reverse with stereo ins.
Yeah.
So you retained your stereo image and things. Yeah.
I mean, I've just done a mix today. I've done the opposite. I've put the reverb the opposite side to the.
Are you a sort of like? Are you a?
I'm a rebel.
Are you a sort of hi-hat left or a hi-hat right man?
Oh, hi-hat right. I was always trained to be as you're looking at the kit.
How do you play? How do you play drums in the studio?
I totally. Yeah, you go. But you're right, because I mean I was a crap drummer. I had a drum kit when I was 9 years old for about 6 years, and I was a crap drummer. And my first experimentations in a studio, even with a drum machine, with my crappy band that I dragged into Livingston in downtime, I would pan the toms to go. Bloom, 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 like from left to right.
So the correct way.
Which is kind of what you assume if you've ever played the drums.
Yeah.
But I was then had it drummed into me from Abbey Road engineers and people who supposedly knew what they were talking about, that you should be as you look at the kit. And I went with that, really.
Because I remember co-producing a session with John Bryant once.
Oh, yeah.
And our morning ritual would be him coming back and panning the drums the other way, because I'd have been on the night before. And this went on for weeks, just back and forth. It's like, oh, John's been on the desk, the drums are panning, It became a bit of a sort of running joke, really. But
that's interesting. Because then what do you do if you get a left-handed drummer?
This is the great question, isn't it? It's like, then they shouldn't be playing left-handed.
Well, it's true. You don't get left-handed cellos or pianos.
But it's funny. I mean, the technical side of it's funny because I used to be so into like equipment, and I loved all that side of it. And the more I've worked with other engineers, the more it doesn't really interest me. I like, I mean, ICP was fantastic because I mean their mic collection is just unbelievably good. They've got sort of mics that go back to the Third Reich with the swastikas on and everything. They got, which is a little bit alarming when you're playing a tambourine. It's like, but
you feel it's a tambourine.
But it's like Clint walked into that mic room and I thought he would never come out.
Yeah.
It was quite embarrassing to see really, but they had amazing like 50 snare drums and 10 drum kits and like 30 amps and just it was and walls and walls of like metallic cupboards full of every guitar pedal imaginable. And I've always been a bit of a sucker for a guitar pedal.
Oh yeah.
Being the world's worst guitarist, I have quite a big collection of pedals and it was just so we would deliberately, rather than go for things we knew, it was like you just get a plastic box and you'd fit it with stuff and take it in and use it. So it's like we had this rule: you weren't allowed to use anything that you knew. So we would only take pedals that we didn't know, and it was great because we just like all these whole vocabulary of new sounds appeared, and we're not going to use the same snare drum on any. So we'd line up these snares and we'd try out. So we used the amazing gear they had there to sort of make us do different things, and it was really hard to go back somewhere else without that amount of gear, and all those great things like I'd always say to Clint, get something a bit like a Krumar Performer, I want that kind of fizzy string sound, and they had one, and you put it up, it's like, oh, actually it's not how I remember the sound, it's even fizzier and even thinner, and and they had memory Moogs and PPGs and all kinds of like great stuff, and it was so exciting to kind of get my hands on that gear. And also I brought in a sort of programming team, a band called Man Without Country, a Welsh kind of like synth duo, because we wanted to bring some really synth elements into it. So well, rather than me sit there and hack away at a mini Moog for hours, let's bring some guys in who really know what they're doing. And they were just in seventh heaven. We set up a B unit in the other studio, so they do all the keyboards just on their rig, and we just import everything from what they were doing. And it's just that the kitchen became this sort of synth empire of like every keyboard imaginable, and it was really creative. Like it was real kids in a sweet shop kind of stuff, for everybody, for Clint, because I guitar pedals and snare drums, and that's my world. I love that side of it.
You don't get excited by new software synthesizers and plugins these days.
I like having them available. I love the convenience of bringing vacuum up or something. It's because they sound really good. It's it's I think this the convenience rather than kind of rather than the sonics. I mean, you can do a lot of things with them, but I've got a few keyboards. I've got a Virus Polar, which I really love for all the sort of for the arpeggiator particularly, but it's just a really, really useful. So I like having something that's very hands-on. I've always...
Well, that's the thing, is it's more than what it sounds like sometimes. It's just how you use it physically, isn't it?
But I learned a lot of producing from Tim Lewis, who he also known as Thighpaw Sandra, who like played for Spiritualized and Coil, and I saw him at Rockfield the other day. I'd known since I was 13 years old. We were at school together,
right?
And he taught me loads about synthesis when I was sort of first getting into producing. He had just like CS80 and RSF and Moogs and PPGs, and so I'd sit in his flat and just play with these synths and just like learn the basis of synthesis. So it's nice to be able to go back and use those skills. So it's always been the instruments that have interested me rather than the mic choices and the compressor choices. That's Clint's domain. He gets really excited about sort of. He was quite pleased the other day because we managed to sort of steal the TG compressor from Cat Stevens or Yusuf Islam, who was upstairs, and it's like they want it back. No, you can't have it. And it was like we stood our ground and we wouldn't let Cat have it back. But because it's a really big part of his vocal sound. The sort of the Sony C800, the CPAC, and the TG limiter. That's his vocal sound really. That's his combo. No EQ, just maybe shelve out some low end and I'm not excited about that. Obviously, for him, it's like But and I've been using the Wurlitzer quite a lot. Just seen one over there. I'm much more of a Whirly man than a Fender Rhodes man.
Well, that's funny you should say. Yeah, I've just sold my Fender Rhodes.
Yeah.
I had both. Over there. I had an 88 note suitcase Rhodes,
Right.
which I bought off Wayne Bickerton, erstwhile a writer of all the Rubettes hits in the 70s.
All right.
About
Sugar Baby Love and all that.
Yeah. He had Odyssey Studios, and which
right.
closed in about 1990 or 1988 or something. And he had all this stuff in the back of his garage in Rickmansworth in his house, and put a big advert in Audio Media and listing all this stuff. And I went there and I bought a Rhodes, a clavinet, and a couple of compressors and things. And I paid 150 quid for the Rhodes 20 years ago, and I sold it to Frank at Sphere a couple of weeks back, £2,000.
There's some good bargains to be had.
But yeah, I much prefer. It's much nicer to play the Whirly.
The Whirly.
I mean, I've had that for even longer.
It just seems to fit in with guitars better for me.
Yeah.
It's an earthier kind of like.
Well, that's what happened. The Rhodes would sit there, not ever getting used, and you'd occasionally use it. And it also, I think, the Rhodes is much easier to emulate with Velvet or whatever. Sound great.
Yeah.
Any of those things. Whereas the Wurtilizer.
Yeah.
It's harder to get that authentic kind of, because you have to hit it hard and make it,
And it's I like anything you got to tune with a blob of solder. Like the old Hohner Pianettes. And,
I've got a Pianet as well up there.
Oh, right.
There's a pile of rubbish on top.
Run it through a fuzz box and do like your early Tony Banks Genesis kind of thing.
As you can see, it's piled up with auto harps and Slade drummers' tom-tom skins and things over there. So I need to dust it off. And
James Bradfield would give it. He gave quite a few of us that sort of like the Suzuki Omnichords.
Yeah, I got one of those as well.
And they're great. I've used it on so many records.
Yeah, they're good fun.
Because he was like not a keyboard player, but he could sketch up keyboard ideas on it. It's because he gave one to myself and to Nick Naismith, the keyboard player, when we did his record.
There's an iPad app that does that now.
Oh, right.
Polychord.
I've been busting out the old iPad apps. It's quite a nice Mellotron.
Yeah.
Which is
the
pretty
M3000.
good.
Yeah,
Isn't it amazing that what you used to pay for keyboards? Now you can like $7.99 I bought out of a Mellotron for $7.99 or $6.99 or whatever.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
In the track.
Yeah.
You would never. Much as I'd love to have a big white Mellotron sitting there.
Whole Fairlight you can get in an iPad app.
Obviously, going to go back to and have a dig through.
Fairlight. That's good. That's the one you want. Peter Vogel. I think we've probably got enough there to keep us busy for a while. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, just thank you very much, George. It's good to see you again.
Chat with you again. Yes, and some particularly good top tips, weren't there? I thought it was totally brilliant.
So 2023 then.
Yeah, we'll see you then.